This particular session that we will be having is about the future. It is about what many people dream about. It is thinking about what the country could look like in the years to come. It is a discussion about the world that we live in. It is the world that our children will need to live in. And not long ago, I was on a panel and we were discussing the environment. And I think what we should be concerned about is the world that the child this afternoon, born in Cape Town or elsewhere in South Africa, will need to live in. This is not about sometime in the future. 40, 50 years from now, these are the children being born today and the responsibility that we have towards them. It's also responsibilities towards my 3 daughters every day. And I always wonder what we're doing from an educational perspective. As an economist, in the first 5 minutes of any economics lecture, we are taught land, labor, and capital. Unfortunately, land is never mentioned again. The rest of your economic and management degrees about, and I've always wondered that as a property economist why land never comes up again. But I've tended to change that over the years. And I've said to my students, land is not land, it's ecology. Labor, it's not labor, it's humanity. And the final one, capital, is the money. And the incredible thing is, this world has plenty of money. There's plenty of it. Some create too much of it with inflation, but let's not get into that. But money is not the problem that we face. Maybe we all want a bit more out of the pot. But I think it's what we do with ecology and humanity that is so important. And really what we want to do this afternoon is talk about exactly that. The child that will be born today will be living in a world which a recent book has called Humanity 3.0. It's a world, this will be the first generation that will live in a world where the computer is probably cleverer than any human on this planet. Where we as humans will not be at the top in decision makers. We'll have many other attributes. Hopefully our EQ will be higher, although with some of the students coming through the system, I wonder, they're getting smarter. I'm sometimes wondering about the EQ bit. But it is a world where humanity will need to deal in a world where as humans, like I said, others will make decisions, computers will make the decisions. And how we as humans interact in that world will be something very different to what we face presently. Let me move on to the panel and the panelists that we have. We will start with a presentation by a household name to many of us. And Iman, thank you very much for that introduction as you started, with Professor Jonathan Jansen. I think being in education myself, it's been an enormous interest to follow his work. He's presently a distinguished professor of education at the University of Stellenbosch, studied at Cornell, Stanford, and other American universities. A list of awards, which includes the Education Africa Lifetime Achiever Award, presented in New York, and also won a number of book awards, including the British Academy for Social Sciences Humanities for his book, Knowledge in the Blood. And I think there's an important observation that I'd like to make about the work of Professor Jansen. And that is, this is not just a piece of work or books that have been written over the years about necessarily education, whether outcomes-based education was good or bad. Some people will say it's a short discussion, it was bad. Others would maybe have a longer discussion. But I think that much of his book, including the book Inequality in South African Schools, Making Love in a War Zone, are really, it's an analysis of the sociology of education. It's an understanding of what we do as South Africans the responsibilities that we have, what we deliver to some people and what we don't deliver to others. And I think, yes, politics is part of this. Having some French blood in me, I've always made the point, in France, there is nothing called economics, doesn't exist as a course. You study économie politique, political economy. For some reason in the Anglophone world, we've managed to drop the politics bit of it. And I think very much a discussion about education is a political discussion. It's also important when you're here. He's a supporter of the Blue Bulls, or Orlando Pirates. I think we're hearing a few views coming through. And a grandfather as well. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Professor Jonathan Jansen, and I'll introduce the rest of the panel after that. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for those kind remarks, Professor Veruli, my TV crush, all of you, thank you very much. It is true that I am a distinguished professor at the University of Stellenbosch, except that the HR department sent me a letter. Now, here's the problem with Afrikaans, you know, and the Tannie who wrote this obviously didn't have too much English. And so my letter, which I will keep for posterity, says, congratulations, you have been appointed as an extinguished professor of education. So I am feeling quite burnt out, and good to be here. I know nothing about property, but I must tell you I was very, very impressed by what I saw here and what you're doing for the country, all of you very smart people in this industry, so that's really excellent. My daughter's dating a guy, I'm just going to put it out there. His name is Lutando. He's from the Eastern Cape. He's just moved to Cape Town to be with my daughter, and he's looking for a job in the property sector. If you could help the poor bloke, otherwise this marriage is over. But anyway, in any event, I want to start with a picture. Here's a picture of my granddaughter. I want you to watch something. 13 months old in New Zealand, unfortunately. As an educator, as a teacher, this is for me very profound. Not just because she's my granddaughter, but because something amazing is happening right there. Sir, you look like a failed UCT graduate. Tell me. Are you a Marty? I'll give you the... Ma'am, what did you see in that picture? What profound principle of scientific learning did you see there in that picture?
Well, she was fascinated by the fact that as she opened the curtains, there was light that came through. And so she's very inquisitive to learn.
13 months old.
She's inquisitive, yes. And she just noticed that the sun came through the curtain as she played with it.
It's not because she's a Jansen. Right. Sir, what principle of science is at play here? The lady is right, of course. She is curious what's going on. But what basic principle of science? You see, she can't speak yet. But there's something profound going on in the kid's mind at 13 months. You must have done some science somewhere in your career.
I'm not sure about science, but I think it's just the inflection of light. I don't know if she's noticing that. She can't probably...
You want my granddaughter to know about the theory of wave, No, very simple, sir. What scientific principle? Come on, guys.
It's repetition.
Repetition, oh my God. I think you guys should rather just stick to building buildings and selling stuff. Here's a very simple scientific principle called cause and effect. She knows that if she opens the curtain, there's light. Then she goes back. If she closes it, there's light. Why is it that a 13-month-old kid can figure out Cause and effect. And yet our entire school system is organized on the principle of low expectations, of dumbness, of dumbing down. This is the only country in the world that's got a stupid subject called life orientation. Let me give you my definition of life orientation. If your kid does life orientation, tell them not to take it. Life orientation is the clap your mother should have given you on the way to school. Then we have a stupid subject called mathematical literacy, which is math for dummies. Every kid can do mathematics. If a 13-month-old kid can figure out cause and effect, why can't every child do quadratic equations? Why can't every child do basic calculus? There's nothing wrong with our kids. And yet, the entire school system is organized on the basis that the kids can't. And I use this recent story of Zara, my granddaughter, because I don't think she's different from any other child, obviously. I must tell you the story about mathematical literacy. I was invited, the Cape Town schools are fascinating. I've been back here now after, I grew up here, but I've been away in other parts of the world and other provinces of our country. So now I'm back here, and the place hasn't changed very much. And so I go to this English school. The English fascinate me because, the Afrikaans guy will tell you, ek hou nie van swartes nie, and you know exactly where you stand. The English guy will also insult you, but it's only when you get home at night and you take a shower that you realize you've been insulted. And that's the beauty. That's the beauty of English culture, and so on. So what is fascinating, I go to this English school in Rondebosch. It's a boys' school. I won't mention it because, it's a sensitive issue. And the principal says to me on the way to addressing the parents, now this is the English guy speaking, Professor Jansen, I do not mean in the slightest to even begin to suggest. I said, just get to the fucking point. Okay, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. But can you please not talk to our parents about mathematical literacy? I said, sir, are you nuts? Your school can afford the best math teachers in the world. I mean, their fees are north of 100,000 rand per annum, and that's not even the add-on stuff, Why, you offering math literacy? Isn't this the school I said, the school will remain nameless, isn't this the school that gave us Mark Shuttleworth? He said, that's true, but we also gave you Herschel Gibbs. I said, okay. Be inclusive, take on everybody else. But the future of your profession depends almost entirely on who comes through the school system, who comes through the technical colleges, who comes through the university system. Without that, because I don't know much about education, and I must yield to my friend here who's an economist, but human capital, the term, comes from economists. In fact, I was supervised for my PhD by an economist whose own supervisor was a chap called Theodore Schultz, who came up with this term at the University of Chicago. And there's two things that are very, very clear in the South African situation with regard to human capital. One is that the social rates of return to investment in human capital in South Africa is among the highest in the world. In other words, society benefits enormously when you invest in this thing called human capital. But secondly, the individual rates of return are also among the highest in the world. In other words, the individual who gets a degree, who studies further, gets much more out of it than almost any other individual in any part of the world. Now, that's huge. And that is why you see education is such a sensitive issue in our country. But there's a problem. And the problem is that our government doesn't think there's a problem. Now, I understand that President Ramaphosa's main preoccupation at the moment is the SOEs, is the state of the economy. I understand that. But he doesn't care a damn right now about education, which is why he keeps Angie Motshekga there when she should be fired. And he brings back Blade from transport. That wasn't a very sharp move, if you get my drift. But it shows a country that doesn't really, at the level of government, understand the nature of the crisis. Let me tell you what's going on in the sector at the moment. Okay? Now, of course, we must be clear. This is one of my most beautiful phrases that I got from Ugandan political scientist called Mahmoud Mamdani, who gave this beautiful phrase, the present doesn't explain itself. In other words, when you see a shack, you can't explain the shack on its own terms. Okay? As they say in my second language, dat het 'n lang aanloop. It comes from a long way onwards. And so you can't simply, when you see violent people and farm murders, think that it just happened through spontaneous combustion. This thing happens over a long period of time. And that is why, in our country, the first big problem is inequality. You have basically two school systems in our country. I've just finished a study, it will come out towards the end of the year, through UCD Press, and the title of the book is Who Gets In and Why, and it's on the politics of admissions in 30 of the most expensive primary schools on the continent of Africa, all along the southern suburbs. So we literally walk down the main road from Jan van Riebeeck in the City Bowl all the way down to Paul Greyling in Fischhoek. And then in between, of course, you have the Westerfords and the Herschels and the Wet Pups and all of these amazing schools. I didn't grow up there. I grew up in horrible schools. And so I'm amazed that you can have a school with 3 astroturfs, 4 swimming pools, and then apart from the swimming pools, there's also a pool for the water polo. I didn't know this. These are 2 different kinds of pools, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then 10 kilometers away, a kid can drown in their own shit. Now, I have a question for you. How do you live with yourself? How do you live with yourself? And yet, the pretense in government is we're doing well because of matric scores. I'll tell you something about that in a minute. These are 2 schools in KwaZulu-Natal. How do you sleep with this? Sleep at night. How do you live with yourself? You see, these things bother me, and I blame my evangelical upbringing. That you're not okay until everybody else is okay. They mess me up with that shit. I mean, why does this guy with 99 sheep go and look for 1 sheep? This is crazy. It makes no sense. Economically, it makes no sense, at all. This is what we live with in 2019. Sorry. And if you look at the historical picture showing up in the present, this is what you get when you're looking at math scores. Now, you know, all of these identities for me are fictional identities, you know. Some idiots at my own university, current university, just produced a piece of research on the intelligence of colored women. I said, fuck. 2019. So on the 16th of September in Stellenbosch, you're very welcome. I'll be doing my inaugural lecture, which I've tried to dodge, but now I have something to say. And it's going to be 100 years of research. I've got teams right now in the archives of the university digging up every piece of research ever written over 100 years since the founding of the university in 1918 on colored people. And as they say in Afrikaans, die vere gaan vlieg. But the thing is that there's nothing at all unusual about that research. If you look over 100 years, nothing has changed, in fact. In fact, I just read a piece of research from the medical school. I mean, if you think academics are up to shit, you're right. You know what this research is about? It's that African women, black African women, have stronger pelvic muscles than colored and white women. What the fuck? First of all, who cares? Secondly, who bloody funded the study? But we are so locked, I'm not making this up, we are so locked into these 4 categories. But for political reasons, I want to keep it there because it explains something, particularly of the Western Cape, that when you look at the results in mathematics, it goes in, there's a very strong correlation between the levels of funding, you know, even before 1948, and the outcomes that you get in mathematics. This is not because people are black, colored, Indian, or white. This is because the system was rigged in favor of some people and not others. This is what we sit with today. Secondly, it's a very inefficient system. So inequality is one thing, but it's also inefficient in an economic sense in that you're putting in all of these resources at the input level, but at the output level, you're getting very little. So my friend Nick Spall and colleagues put this together. Let's say for every 100 kids that start off in grade 1, only 60 write matric. Only 37 pass matric. only 12 go to university. Only 6 get some kind of university qualification certificates, and only that. And 4 of that 100 that started will get a degree, a 3-year degree on average, within 6 years following matric. In economic terms, that is wasteful in the extreme. And then, of course, there's an inattention in government to the situation that we're in. You've all seen these international tests of achievement. This is one of my favorite ones, where South Africa is always dead last, although I remember 2 years ago we were second from the bottom in one of these tests, thanks to Guinea-Bissau. We need to thank Guinea-Bissau for same as embarrassing. Have a look at this. You give this question to grade 5 kids and you ask them which box holds the most. And only 56% of South African kids will even come close to getting that right. And that's an average. This is what happens in the richest schools and in the poorest schools in response to that question. So you're telling me we don't have a problem? We do. A massive problem. Did you know that all of us were waiting for the Pearls results? Sarah Howie was a colleague of mine. I hired her at the University of Pretoria, one of the sharpest people in international tests of achievement. And when the study came out, we thought we'd get to 50, maybe 60%. 78%, almost 8 out of 10 kids in grade 4 in our country cannot read for meaning in any language. In other words, you put a book in front of the kid at the grade level, and the kid doesn't understand what's going on. Now, how the hell can you expect graduates of quality to come into you? You know, one of the things I used to do at university is I used to open my door 24/7 to students, and in particular first-year students, and they would come in. But any student could come in, and they would normally come in just to chat or to ask for money for their studies, which is fair enough. And then I would say to the student, write for me a letter that says why you need the extra money for your studies, so that I have it on record. But there was another reason I wanted to see where. I have yet to get a letter, whether that kid went to Grey High School or whether that kid went to Botshabelo High School. I couldn't get a single kid to write a simple letter without 6 or 7 errors in the letter. This has to do, of course, with reading. So what are we going to do? Obviously, as a professor, where's the other guy? As a professor, my son asked me one day in grade 6, he said, Dad, what do professors do? And it was a really good question, because I never thought about that, you know. And yes, it doesn't apply to UCT, but I said to him, son, they pay you to think. They pay you to think. So I think, and I worry about Zara when she comes back. Most of all, I worry about her education. Because I don't know how you build a strong economy. I don't know how you build a decent society. I said to the boys at Rondebosch Boys the other day, they asked me to speak to the kids. I said to them, you know, the one thing I can guarantee you is that your school will give you a good technical education. You'll get 6 distinctions, which probably means you're not very smart. It means you could memorize things. But I cannot guarantee you that your school will give you a decent education in which you learn to respect people who don't look like you, make love like you, pray like you. That I can't guarantee, because I've seen too much shit coming out of boys' schools. We cannot build a decent society. We cannot build a competent society. We cannot grow a strong economy unless we fix this problem. So let's have the panel talk about this.
Thank you very much. Professor Jansen, let me not start with you. Let's give you a moment just to breathe after your presentation. And I will start. I thought what we'd do is start immediately with the property sector. Have you all got a microphone? I think I'm going to put this one back. Oh, are you all linked up?
Yeah.
Okay, you know what I'm going to do? Just for the tech guys, I'm just putting this microphone down and I'm going to use the...
Oh, you need it.
Would you?
Oh,
would
okay.
you prefer that? Fine.
Cool.
Let's start with the property sector. I think that, Dr. Matsuneke, if we look at the property sector at the moment, there's a lot of education that happens in this sector. But it would always seem to me that we're rather fragmented. Companies, we have a number of companies that have academies of their own. Everybody's trying to do their bit. Maybe your views on what we should be looking at as a sector.
Yeah, thanks, Prof. I don't know if this mic is on. I suppose it is.
Yeah.
After that discussion, I was sitting there thinking to myself, what am I going to do on that stage? It got a little terrifying listening to the Prof. I think the sector went through a phase of transformation which needed, it was almost a tick box exercise that we did. Everybody was interested in making sure they get their points from a BE perspective and move along. It was an era where the gazetting of the codes came through and nobody gave attention to what should we do as a consolidated effort. And we ended up running helter-skelter. Everybody did their own thing to tick the box. And we thought we'll get to level whatever it is, and then we would then move on from there. And what you're seeing now is a ramification of that exercise. And I think what we're looking to do at the moment, certainly with my new hat on at a property sector charter level and in the Vukile Academy, is to try and create quality, a breed of quality professionals that we can bring into the industry who have a similar type of thinking and analogy in order to close the skills gap. And from a charter perspective, our aim now is to try and work with all these many bursaries that are outside to create what we would call a skills development foundation. And at the heart of it is really to try and almost get a best practice around how do you deal with people who want to contribute bursaries, who want an internship, and who would like to have entrepreneurship. So I think the time has come for us to work together, and instead of trying to have this separated and disjointed effort. And what I'm hearing from the industry at the moment is that there is a craving for that. And hopefully we can put our heads together to consolidate that position.
Would you like to add something to this?
Certainly. Thank you, Francois. I think the industry in the last 15 years, like Sadisa's saying, and maybe it was a bit of a tick box exercise, while experiencing tremendous growth, I think there's a natural progression in terms of skills development at different levels of the sector. I think we've done fairly well with formal qualifications. I think tertiary institutions have created programs, specific qualities towards real estate, built environment, et cetera, et cetera. And we've seen a significant influx of these students, you talk about youth integration and females coming into the sector. I think where we've fallen short is, while there is funding through bursaries for the type of education, is once you integrate the graduates at a foundation level in the sector, we seem to come unstuck in terms of being able to integrate them into the other levels. So if you look at the extent of key competencies that are created at a middle to senior management, executive level, we still have a massive gap. And I think in my mind, perhaps the starting point is to do a proper skills gap analysis. While we are trying to drive initiatives to ensure that we address whatever challenges we have, I think it will hold us in good stead to understand what the picture looks like at the moment. Skills development, inequality, gender and racial diversity, and competitiveness in terms of the industry is not mutually exclusive. And I think sometimes as business, we almost separate the strategies in terms of skills development. So I think the need is being able to integrate the skills that have come through the graduate level into different segments of the sector where the real impact is required.
Thank you very much for that. And I think you make this very important point. Study after study have shown that people who make it to the top of organizations, it's not necessarily skills. It's the EQ that gets you to the final level. It's the top 25%. There are many who stop at the skills level, but often our programs, the education that we're involved with, doesn't really provide that EQ that gets you to that final level. Maybe Professor Jansen, we can maybe just at a moment talk about that. So yes, and that sort of integrated education that we should be involved with. Let's move on to the world of technology. Raphael, must have been 2 months ago, somebody said to me, to do well in property, what should I study? And the answer that I gave, which wasn't completely flippant, was go and study drama and psychology. Yeah? And I just said that at the point, and I didn't mean it flippantly, but actually, the more that I think about that statement, the truer it comes. And I'm not saying that to be a good property professional, you have to have a drama script that you play towards. But I think we have particular characters in this industry that would do well in operas from time to time. But the issue is this, that we at UCT are also looking at the property practitioner Mark II. What does this person need to know in a world where valuations are automated, quantity surveying, push of a button maybe,
Sure.
or a bit more?
Thank
What are we, and so I suppose what interests me from your perspective is the property sector in the fourth industrial revolutions, where, like I said, where we will have computers that can make decisions a lot better than us. Whether they'll make the right human decisions is something else. Your views on it?
Sure, thank you for that. Good to see you again. I think I did a class with you at Masters in Property many years back. So
My apologies.
Your class. I didn't manage to practice in property, but listening to my colleagues, I think the challenges there are quite similar to many other industries I've looked at. And I think for me, the starting point of the challenge is that many of the education programs and training programs that we continue to create and we sponsor and we provide bursaries for are really still geared at content-driven learning. This is a basic assumption that if you give someone enough quality, cool content, they will become a great valuer or they'll become a great developer. And we are seeing that that is not actually true. And we are seeing that there's a big gap between transferring technical knowledge and actually building mindsets, behaviors, and values. And this is where the demand in the fourth industrial revolution is going to come from a great deal. We saw in the beginning when Professor Jansen played the video of the little girl and the cause and effect science principle. It speaks to some of the research that I spend quite a lot of time doing in terms of when we're born as children, we actually start with the most basic behavior of an ability to respond to tasks and challenges that come up, to stimulus that comes up in our environment. And as we grow older, we're supposed to learn how to respond in a more sophisticated and adequate way to deal with the complexity of the tasks and challenges that arrive. But we don't necessarily get exposure and quality of experiences to keep building that muscle. We get switched into the school environment where it's get content, and we're not building the muscle to actually be able to respond to the challenges and tasks that come around us. And Charles Darwin already quoted many years back that it's not the strongest or the most intelligent species that survives, but the most responsive to that change. And a lot of the research at the moment coming up in neuroscience and neuroplasticity really talks about how developing mindsets, behaviors, values comes from crafting quality life experiences over a long period of time. And a lot of the challenges we're seeing is that we keep giving content as opposed to understanding the exposure and experiences that a young person will need to have to be able to become a property practitioner that has, is independent, that can exercise the decision making, that can respond to a completely new job set, that can operate in a new environment that we still cannot yet define? How do we create a responsive professional that can adapt to that new environment that will come up? And this, for me, is the big gap that we are struggling with and grappling with a number of industries. Is how do we measure for and define that new intelligence framework that isn't going to be content-based?
And, yes.
Sure, thanks, Prof. No, great point. I mean, I have a very fundamental problem with property 4.0 or 3.0. And I'll tell you why, and I think Prof. Jansen touched on it. Our country is not, it needs to be aware of it, but the fundamentals on the ground are not poised for a South Africa property 4.0. And the only reason is because the fundamentals on the ground and what we are seeing, and Prof's 6 out of 100 making it through, is that you have, if you extrapolate, I mean, that number is 60, 70% of people who don't even have property 101. And I think that in the process, it's important to be aware of it and to be cognizant of it. But I think that if machines are going to do valuations and QSing and what have you, you're gonna kill the industry. I think it's a point that I've debated with many people, but then we become inefficient. But I'm saying, then you're going to have an unemployed society going forward.
I think it's an interesting point that you make, and I think it's a technological point, and it's a point that I've made in the past, that the risk that we run on this continent is that children at night will have data on their phones, and we'll be playing computer games, but there won't be any food on the table. You'll have data, but no food. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have at the moment. The Economist came out with an article last week saying that looking at people's phone in the emerging country context, 85% of the data used is used for gaming and social media. 10% gets used for business and education. So sometimes we sell computers and cell phones across this continent as the answer to market efficiencies, when in fact it's maybe the gaming industry that is. But anyway, let me not go further, let me not push further on that. But of course that linkage between technology and the way that we teach, the accessibility of education, I think is something that becomes of interest. Before I move back to Professor Jansen,
I just had an additional comment on what happens in the industry as more things are automated, such as valuations and things. And I think it's critical to bear in mind that if we don't push ourselves forward, another country will and makes us irrelevant and redundant. There's no ways forward but to adopt the technologies. And the key question we should rather be asking ourselves is, what are then the human-specific skills that we should rather be imparting as opposed to trying to replicate what a computer can do much better? And this is the task of every industrial revolution. We stop doing the things that we thought we were great at and shifting to other things. And I think that's a normal change, but it's obviously painful when we are the ones in it. But we cannot stop that wave in particular.
As I always say, the French, as we know, the word sabotage comes from the French sabot, which is a clog, which the workers used to put in machines to stop machines from working, hence sabotage. You put your sabot into the machine. So in the first industrial revolution, there was already a stop of technology, and people were sabotaging machines.
Francois, if I may,
yes,
just
and
before you go to the professor, just to support what my colleagues have said, and to maybe challenge what Dr. Moseneke is putting forward, is that I think the industry still very much relies on human capital.
Right.
And I think for me, creating key competencies that will ensure competitiveness in the industry and closing the gap in terms of inequality is really how we dovetail new technologies and innovation, and rightfully so. I think we can't ignore it. And for us to continue to be competitive and serve our clients, we have to look at new ways to work. But it's how we dovetail those new technologies with the current workforce and the current skill set that exists in the workforce, so you don't create that isolation and the unintended consequence of increased unemployment and inequality, et cetera, et cetera.
But that's exactly what technology plays. I mean, I know of a program where we used to put 30 people a year through the program. We went online and we've just put 1,500 people through the process. You know, it's that accessibility of education that changes. But anyway, let's, Professor Jansen, from what you've heard, maybe would you like to comment? Well, maybe also a question for you. I see that you use the word skills there, not education. I don't want to be pedantic on words, but would you differentiate?
I would, but let me just take a step back. I've absolutely enjoyed listening to the three other speakers. Look, I think you need three things here to make the system work. And again, I can't speak about property because I don't know much about it. But the one thing, and you're correct, you've got to build the foundations of the system first, okay? If you can't read and write, if you can't calculate, if you can't compute, then there is a problem. Sure. And so our biggest challenge is not to fix the system from the top down, certainly not matric, but to fix it with a very, very strong preschool and foundation phase. If the minister just gets that, we already, get that right. But that's where our problem starts, okay? You can't fix a math problem in grade 10. You've got to fix a numeracy problem even before the kids get to school. So the middle classes, black and white, are very good at sending their kids to good preschools, talking to the kid at home. This kid just did a tour with a mother who's a preschool teacher in Auckland this morning, of a aquarium in which she gets to try and say the word penguin and try to figure out what floats and what sinks. These are really basic science concepts, but that's an advantage, a privilege, because of her class status, right? That kid doesn't worry me. What worries me is what happens to the majority of our children. Now, I've taught in probably the wealthiest school in the world. I go there once a year. It's called Castellea in the heart of the Silicon Valley, a girls' school where Steve Jobs' daughter went. And I work with the worst school in the world, which is Oscar Mpeta High School in Nyanga. Do you know what I can tell you for sure? Having looked at these kids and worked with them and sent some of them to university, there's absolutely no difference between a kid in Castellea and a kid in Nyanga. No difference whatsoever.
Wonderful.
Okay? The problem is the inputs that we make, the educational inputs. The best thing to do then is fix at the level of the foundations. The second thing we need to do is to really think about education differently. And here I want to park skills for a moment. And think about education as the ability to think on your feet. As the ability to be courageous and ask difficult questions, the ability to work with a team and to know when to speak and when not to speak, the ability to fail. This system of schooling in South Africa is risk averse. Right. We beat kids when they come up with the wrong answer in some of our schools. The one thing I know about people who make it in the Silicon Valley, because I interviewed a lot of South Africans who became millionaires there overnight. Okay, many of them from places around the country you haven't heard of. And I asked them, why did you make it here and not at home? Nobody knows you, And the answer was always, first of all, the ethics of work. Secondly, the encouragement of failure. Okay. And thirdly, the assumption that you're going to do well. If I went to this room now, I'm just going to prove something to you here, and maybe you and I are also to blame. This certainly happened to me in my BSc years in South Africa. So let me ask the audience here, who of you, when you were at university, had at least one professor who said something like this? Raise your hand if this happened to you. Welcome to Biochemistry 342. By the end of the first semester, half of you will be gone. Raise your hands if somebody of you have. You get my point. How the hell do you build confidence? How the hell do you build a sense of ambition? How do you build, when your starting point, before you even started chapter 1, is to tell people what they can't do, And that for me is, and the third thing is opportunity, okay? And we don't have, I mean, the difference between, I'm just working with a kid now who's just finished a LLB cum laude at the University of the Free State. I funded her, she comes from my old high school. Cum laude, this kid gets 90% in everything, okay, for every year of LLB. Do you know how difficult it was for her on her own to get, not an internship, what do they call the articles? Do you know how difficult that was? A kid with half a brain can walk out of Bishop's, and his father would call any number of law firms and say, Bob, my son John, he's not very smart. My wife assures me that it's my kid, but can you get, and instantly the kid with half a brain gets in there. It is opportunity. I don't know how estate agents relate to the property sector, but I've just interviewed a whole lot of them. They're among the most racist people in this country. Let me tell you, it's not an accident that a penny sparrow gets nailed. It's not an accident that the Mombergs get nailed. I don't know how it happens that we select people for madness, you know? But you go down here and you look at all this. Did you know there's a strict segregation in Cape Town between who sells a property in Rondebosch and Claremont versus in Grassy Park and Langa? And so opportunity for me and the racist structure of our society is also an important thing in who gets ahead and who doesn't. But those are the three things that I thought I'd raise, two of them coming out from the panel.
Thank you. Professor Jansen, thank you very much. We're slowly running out of time. I could spend a whole evening by the fireplace discussing this. But I think that just to carry on, just to take your point a bit further, it is often said that maybe many in the United States don't get the best education, and people always, geography, do they know that geography or not? But the point is that kids who leave American schools are pretty street smart. And I think it's maybe a point that you were making here with the education that you get. Are you ready for an entrepreneurship, for a job? Are you street smart? Is that the difference between what we're doing here and what happens in the United States from your experience?
No, absolutely. Listen, what does every American parent tell their kid, no matter how dumb they are? What does every American parent tell their kid from the day they're born? But specifically, you're going to become the next American president. Now, it's not true.
I hope so.
No. Now, of course, it's not true. First of all, you've got to be rich, and secondly, you've got to be white. Or at least your mother's got to be white. In the case of Obama.
Okay.
But it doesn't matter that it's not true.
No.
What matters is that you're giving that kid a sense of achievement. You see, when a kid sees a broken window in a school, the messaging system is they don't care about me. When a kid gets told in grade 9, sorry, Sipo or Johnny, you're not going to really make it, do math. The messaging system is negative. And so part of our task in education is to fix the basic things that children need, but it's also to pump into them the idea that you can achieve, And so that's the difference. The American kids, I mean, you're right, they know nothing about the world. Their president knows nothing about the world,
But they're street smart.
But you figured out how you can con people in the case of Trump. You figured out how you can lie your way into, almost any situation. You figured out how you can buy things with Deutsche Bank's money.
You're confident. You may be illiterate, but you're confident.
But yes, and if we can just get half of that, not Trump, but half of that kind of street smartness, as you call it, into our young people, they're already winning.
Okay. Thank you very much. By the way, there is an open mic, and I know, Iman, we're running out of time. I think just to check, there is an open mic policy here. So if anybody wishes to say something, felt that they were not treated well at UCT, use the opportunity. There's just a mic there.
Thank you. Corinne Smith at Fin24. I just want to know, what about the influence of gangsterism on the quality of education and, the impact on children?
Fine. Okay, so the question really relates with the sociological environment that many of our students live in. I know when the fees must before, we also had the issue, oh, well, go onto the internet, when the students said, well, within the first lecture, my bundle is gone. That's fine if you have in a home with the internet, but I think there's a more serious question here. You can't get to the school.
Yeah, look, gangsterism is a huge issue, especially in the Western Cape, and particularly, and I have to mention this in the former, the colored townships, and the reason for that is quite simple, that the degree of upheaval after the 1960s, in particular the Group Areas Act, really dislocated families, dislodged, communities, and created what you see today. So again, you can't explain the gangsterism as if there's something within the people themselves that, tend towards violence. The second issue is, the Western Cape used to have for many years a project called Safe Schools, and I always tell them that's the wrong term. Schools just happen to be there, okay? You have to talk about safe communities, okay? The kids going to school are not dying because they go to school. They're dying because because of stray bullets, gangsters and rival gangs, etc., etc. So to fix this problem, you're going to have to fix the society in which it is embedded. You've got to make sure that people get decent jobs. You've got to make sure that housing is adequate. You've got to make sure there's alternative, all of those kinds of things, okay? But when the national government, which is in charge, as you know, of policing and all of that, and crime and all of that, and plays off the Western Cape because of its DA base, and so we won't fix the train system, which is a joke here, the Metro Rail system, or Metro Fail as the locals call it. And you're not going to fix the crime system because we'll make them look bad in the right. You're playing with people's lives, and I just wish that people would bring national, provincial together and start to tackle this problem. But it's not a safe schools problem; it's a safe community problem.
Right. Thank you very much. I think that, there's one more, and then I'm going to close this, and I'll just do a roundup, and then we'll close the session. There's a gentleman in the center who'd like to ask a question.
Sorry. May I just ask, Professor Jansen, you were asked if you were the Minister of Education, what change you would make to the system.
Is it the background?
Over there.
Sorry.
Where?
Oh.
Top right, yeah. Top right.
Top right.
There, okay, sorry. Could
Sorry.
you just repeat your question, please?
Yes, you asked Professor Jansen what his approach would be if he were to be appointed the Minister of Education.
Okay, fine.
I'd be quite keen to hear his views on that. Thank you.
Which I think it would have been a good idea.
Somebody said to me the other day, while the ministers were waiting for the phone call from
Were you also waiting?
Ramaphosa, no. So somebody says to me, I didn't see you at the swearing-in ceremony. I said, no, there was another ceremony called the swearing-at ceremony. I was at that one. Look, I would do three things.
So what would you do?
Three very simple things. Number one is I would make a massive investment, not in higher education, a massive investment in making sure that every child gets a solid preschool education of high quality even before they get to grade 1.
Right.
There's very good research to back that up in terms of inequality. The second thing is that I would do is I would really retrain every single teacher, okay? The problem isn't the kids. The problem is both the levels of subject matter knowledge of our teachers, but also the level of what we call pedagogical knowledge, the ability to teach.
But wasn't outcomes-based education supposed to sort that out?
Don't get there. I wrote 4 books about that, and nobody believed me because I told them right at the beginning. I wrote 10 reasons why this thing is going to fail.
Fine. Okay, let's move on to point 3.
No, this is your problem is just making sure that the teachers know what they're doing, okay, in terms of the basics. You need to retrain those teachers. I mean, I can give you stories till the cows come home, but our teachers don't know enough science and math and whatever languages, and they don't know how to teach. So you've got to make sure that every teacher is retrained. That would be the second step. And the third thing I would do, this is a very simple thing, and I'm going to ask you guys in the property industry, I'm going to challenge you. Can I do that? You seem to be rich and somewhat smart. But did you know there's only 3,500 pit latrine toilets?
3,500 pit latrines?
In the country.
In the country.
Yeah. Okay. Most of those in the Eastern Cape and a few in Limpopo. Did you know how easy it is to fix that? And we won't fucking fix it. And still kids drown. So for me, it's about doing the simple things right. I go to a school. Do you have a textbook in every subject or a digital this or that? I don't care. Just make sure there's something. Number 2, is the teacher qualified? Right. Number 3, is there a roof over your head? Number 4, do the basic things well, and the rest will follow.
Nice manifesto we could put in 3 points. And I'll be the very last, because otherwise Iman is going to, when you have professors, we do carry on.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kolulego from the station. I just want to ask Professor this question. We just celebrated the inclusion of quite a number of youth in our 6th Parliament. Will it result in the acceleration of policies that are pro-youth, education being one of those, or is just a window dressing?
I'd like to open it up to anyone else in the panel who would like to talk about, if you would like to comment at all, the importance of youth, getting youth into the industry, whether through learnerships. We have the transformation charter in front of us. Are we pushing that? And do we have a chance that the way with a younger blood in Parliament and in government that we could get there?
I certainly think we've made great strides in terms of integrating young people into the sector. And I think, to my point earlier, we lose that youth component because the dynamics that exist is property is a traditional sector. It is a very closed environment in terms of people that operate and have operated in the sector for the past 20 to 30 years. So there's still that disparity in terms of getting young people into the sector and participating throughout the full value chain of the property sector. And therein lies the opportunity. I think our sector gives us a value chain that is complex, but is significant in terms of where we operate and the extent of influence we have on different industries by virtue of the business that we're in. But we have not married that with the necessary skills that are required, and particularly retaining the youth that is coming through the sector.
Just your involvement with the Women's Property Network, a gender perspective on this discussion?
Very passionate about that.
Well, your opportunity to give us a gender perspective.
So just quickly, again, I think WPN in the broader sense is about enhancing and ensuring meaningful participation by females in the sector. And I think the dynamics that exist in the broader property industry are very similar when it comes to gender diversity. I think everyone here knows what the state of female transformation is in the sector, and we are not where we're supposed to be. And really it is, you talk about meaningful economic participation is really where and almost to a certain extent, I think women have played a come along, go along role. You talk about tick box exercises in terms of the codes and the female component requirement. I think it's time for business to start taking seriously the requirement to have females participating meaningfully at different levels of the sector.
Thank you.
It's intensifying.
Thank you.
I think his question was also specifically around whether the inclusion of some young people in the new cabinet is window dressing or sort of effective. And my usual thoughts on that are, I think you need a critical mass to really shift the direction of any kind of organization and things. And one person or two people, to me, still seems a bit of tokenism, and it's very hard for any one or two people to actually shift something. So the same way you can't just have one woman or one young person in a board or in an organization, you do need, I think, to be reaching that 1/3 to actually start shifting sentiment and mindsets in an organization. So I do worry about that.
Thank you very much. Dr. Aaron?
Prof, I think we are at a time. All I want to say is, from an industry perspective, I'm truly impressed with the work that we have seen. I don't think we are there, but I do think that the work that we have seen and the support from an industry perspective to get the skills development side out there has been impressive, and I'm hoping that that support will come through over time as well. Thanks, Prof.
Panelists, thank you very much for the discussion. People often come indicating how important they might be in the degrees. My simple question is, would I invite you around the fireplace for a discussion? I think I would certainly have a whole evening with you around the fireplace. So thank you very much for being here, for sharing your view. Professor Jansen, thank you very much for the presentation. and for having shared your thoughts. I'd like to hand over to Iman, and thank you very much for the questions.